changed it.
It did.
We're live on there and there.
A couple of them. It's not coming up on, well, it says we're live on Turning Leaf's page, so hopefully we're live, but apparently on both of our pages aren't showing up. Well, welcome everybody to Monday Night Live. Kate Semmens.
Hi guys.
Dean Nixon. Turning Leaf out of St. George, Utah. I'm going to adjust this guy a little bit.
Perfect.
And we are excited to join you tonight and to jump into tonight's topic. As always, we're always working to come up with innovative topics that really are helpful to us as human beings as we go through a lot of the challenges that we're going through.
Absolutely. And if you remember, last week we talked about one of the steps in the 4 Steps to Confidence.
Yes.
Which is a book that Dean Nixon wrote with Dr. Richard Moody.
Yep.
When did that come out, Dean?
I can't even remember.
I don't even remember either. I just thought about it. I'm like, well, how long has it been?
It's been a few years. It's been a few years. Yes, we put out the 4 Steps to Confidence. I usually have a copy right here by me, but we put out the 4 Steps to Confidence and goes through 4 specific steps. We were talking about taking healthy risk, which is the first step. But then there's other steps that we've talked about, which are setting and keeping healthy boundaries, making and keeping healthy commitments, and then creating a safe environment.
Right.
So those were the topic. And like you said, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about taking healthy risks.
Right. And we also, in that Monday Night Live, we talked, Dean, about how one of those areas of conversation or skills, right, tends to be what I like to call a trip, right? Like, there's one of them, a couple of them you probably like, because, sorry, back on the healthy risks one, I was like, this is my favorite. It's so much fun. And then Jamie Leitner, our life coach out in Michigan, she just popped in. She and I had a really fun conversation about how she's like, Kate, when you said that, I was just chuckling because she's like, nobody thinks healthy risks are fun, except for apparently me.
Except for you. Except for you. I think a lot of people do think it's enjoyable.
And it depends on your personality, probably a lot, which is great and fine. But there are, Jamie, coming through with 2014 from Jamie. Thanks, James.
Copyrighted 2014. Thank you, Jamie. That's when the book came up. Hello, Linda.
I love it.
Yes. So
anyway, so you may find some that you love, right? That really you know that they stretch and grow you, and it's not exactly the most uncomfortable one. But there's usually one-ish that is a little bit more tricky.
Yes.
To building your confidence, or that you have a more difficult time following through with. And I guess everyone knows what mine is, right? Mine is follow through. Mine's commitment.
We did talk about that. We did talk. There are certain ones that, based upon certain personalities, that we will struggle with them more. And so there are some that come very, very easy and very, very comfortable for some people, and then others one of these areas. But overall, each of these areas will hit somebody.
Yes.
But there are areas that do well, like taking healthy risks as you use. So tonight we really wanted to spend some time and talk about setting and keeping healthy boundaries.
Right.
And this is in the book, the 4 Steps to Confidence book. And it's really important for us to understand how to set and how to keep healthy boundaries. And we always put in the term healthy.
Right.
For a reason. And it's because there are a lot of walls that we put in place, and I think that's where people get confused, is the difference between walls and boundaries. And I see a lot of people that will struggle with thinking that a wall is a boundary. And so that's where the real challenge is really, how do I set boundaries and how do I keep boundaries, and how do I make sure that they're healthy? Well, the first way is to determine whether what we're doing is either a wall or a boundary.
Right. So let's talk about walls then, because that's going to be the easiest one to kind of get out of the way as we move through the different forms of healthy boundaries and the different ways that we need to set healthy boundaries with others as well as ourselves.
Right.
Right?
Yes. So walls themselves, one of the differentiating factors between walls, that was a big word, by the way. I did good with
Differentiating.
Differentiating.
It's like chewing your Dana.
Is the difference, and I probably say it with a Southern Utah accent too, so it probably sounds even worse. differentiating between walls and boundaries. Walls are, I try to help people, encourage people to think of literally a wall.
Right.
And if you're standing and another person is on the other side of a wall, there's not a lot of communication. If there is, it's very limited. It's very hard to hear. If you can barely, put your ear up there, it's kind of muffled, or maybe tapping or knocking. But really, it's essentially a stopping or stifling things from really moving forward. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I see people throwing up walls, and thinking that they're boundaries. So, I don't want to see that person. Right. I don't want to talk about it anymore. Or, this is my boundary. We're not going to do this. You're crossing my boundary. And realistically, it's not. It's a wall that's being put up. And that wall in and of itself is what keeps you from moving forward, because we're not exercising healthy boundaries. We're actually just stopping everything from moving forward. Now, it does feel safe to some degree.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking of a number of times that I feel like I've probably put walls up in my life just to be safe and feel protected, like potentially cutting people out of my life that were a little bit toxic for me.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it is easier to do. The challenge with it is that what it does to us and what it does to relationships is really where it's hurtful. Because in relationships, when we're putting up walls, we aren't resolving issues. We're not working through things. Mm-hmm. We're not really creating movement in our own life. And now there are times when people will ask me, they'll say, well, what about these super unhealthy people? And how do you protect yourself from unhealthy people that just won't respect boundaries or walls? And again, there still is a level of boundary that we use in that situation where we're not totally cutting them out of our life, but we are limiting the access that they have mm-hmm. to certain parts of our life or to certain aspects of our lives. And that's not throwing up a wall. A wall is just simply cutting everything off and shutting mm-hmm. everything out, if mm-hmm. that makes sense.
Absolutely. So here's the question then. Is there ever a healthy time to create a wall?
Well, that's a great question, and I think people ask me that quite a bit, especially after we start talking about the difference between walls and boundaries. Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is if there are walls that are already currently in place, then working to shift them to a boundary may require that you leave the wall in there for a minute. Mm-hmm. Until you've learned a new skill, or until you've learned a new way, or until the boundary itself becomes strong enough or healthy enough that can be implemented. But once you can replace that wall with a boundary,
that feels to be more healthy for me to put in a little bit of a wall here. I'm just thinking about a lot of men that I've dated. Like, to be straight up honest with you, that's exactly the relationships that my head are going to, right?
Okay.
Like,
all right.
Like, okay. So I have not been able to either be brave enough to have a conversation and say, all right, look, or it's just been like, nope, bam, I can't talk to you anymore. And I've communicated that, but then I also therefore block said number on my telephone.
All right.
Right. So that's the wall.
Well, to some degree, yes, to some degree. And that's the difference. One of the ways that we describe it in the book is that that boundaries, I'm talking about boundaries now. Boundaries keep relationships safe mm-hmm. by creating a solution-seeking culture through open communication and agreements. Mm-hmm. And the key there is twofold. The number one is the solution-seeking culture. And so what we're always looking for is the solution. But we have to first step back and recognize this. We make people problems. Right? And mm-hmm. people aren't problems. Mm-hmm. People are people. People have problems. There are problems between people, mm-hmm. but people aren't problems. But when we turn them into problems and we make the person the problem, which is what I see happen the most, mm-hmm. then we never solve anything. And we usually do that by telling stories about them mm-hmm. or how they did this to us and blame us for this, or we blame them for that, whatever.
And really what we're doing is just trying to give ourselves permission. Like, we're just justifying the
shutting everybody out.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. So the walls themselves are different because they don't allow things to move forward, where boundaries are, number one, looking for solutions. And sometimes those solutions are, like you said, well, this is not healthy for me to participate in, mm-hmm. so right now I have to step away from this. And so I may not be able to do a lot of the communication or communicate. The second important part about boundaries is open communication and agreements. So open communication and agreements, what I'm doing is I'm verbalizing, like you said, I'm telling, hey, look, right now I'm taking a break. I got to block everybody from this because I'm not in a healthy place to be interacting. So in a way, you were setting a boundary.
Well, good.
So
I just did it in a really good, definitive, I cannot be contacted by you because you are now blocked from my life.
And so you block them. But the reality is it's the communication piece that makes that work. So the more that we can communicate, the more that we're able to come up with, okay, identify the problem, identify the solution, and communicate with that, and then implement the boundary as it is. Now, there are times where people will be hostile towards that or may not want to interact with that, and sometimes they may not even want to participate in it. But the key is for us to do our best to stay engaged and express, hey, this is where I'm at, this is how I feel about it, and that's where you move forward with that. Looping back, there are those moments where people are super unhealthy and they have super unhealthy behaviors, and they may not be in a good healthy space, or you may not be in a good healthy space, or the two of you together may not be a healthy
exactly
space.
What I was thinking.
Then in that situation, you may have to work to limit the exposure or limit the access that you have to one another or to have to certain situations. But there usually is some kind of a discussion that begins that process. And those are really healthy ways. And so when it comes to boundaries, again, really we've got to be setting boundaries with us. That's the one that we have to work the hardest to do, is to set the boundary with me and how I set a boundary with myself.
Can I say something real quick before we move on to the boundaries
with
self? Because I'll lose the thought. And I think it's pretty good, so I'm going to roll with it.
Roll.
So I also really like how we were talking about oftentimes maybe the person that you're trying to have a conversation with and set a boundary with isn't being very receptive to it, right? They may be feeling attacked or personalized, even though you're trying to do so in a very healthy way, right? That's the point we're talking about. It's healthy boundaries here. The cool bit with that, you guys, is it doesn't matter whether or not they're going to be like, okay, game on, I respect your boundary, right?
Right.
As long as you state it, then all you have to do is make sure that you keep it, that you keep your end of it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because I love that we were talking about how people aren't the problem. People are also not projects, right? And I think that's a lot of times when we get lured out of our boundaries is when we start making people projects.
True.
Like, they're not a DIY. You're not going to turn them into a birdhouse. They're not projects.
Right.
They're people.
They're people.
Exactly. And so if you're thinking like, yeah, great, I have this relationship that I really want to keep, but I have a really difficult time like setting my boundaries with that person or communicating those sorts of things, then those are some different aspects of it to look at and say, okay, why do we struggle with this? What is it? What's probably their part? What's my part?
Right.
And how can we come together to make this more of a healthy experience in creating boundaries?
Yes. And I think the biggest issue that we have is in doing that is we always, in our minds and the way that we've grown, we believe that there is a victim and a perpetrator in all things.
Right.
And usually we will pose ourselves more as the victim than the perpetrator.
Well, it feels way better to be the victim than the perpetrator. Nobody wants to be the bad guy.
Nobody wants to be the bad guy. But the reality of it is that the minute we create a victim perpetrator mentality, we've eliminated the possibility of solutions. And again, now I'm not talking about criminal behaviors. I'm not talking about the extreme, the domestic violence things. I'm not going there, and that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to a dispute between siblings or husbands and wives or children and parents and co-workers, employees, employers. That's what I'm talking about. And so when you get into this idea of there's a perpetrator and there's a victim here, that really takes the potential of solving the problem away. We don't identify the problem because the person did this to me or this person did this to me, instead of stepping back and going, okay, really what happened here is either a breakdown, and this is what I normally find it is. It's usually a huge breakdown in communication.
Yes.
Or people over-personalizing things that have nothing to do with them, or people projecting issues that they have onto other people, responding inappropriately or responding in an adverse or negative way. And finally is people feeling like they're not being heard, or people feeling like their needs aren't getting met. And so then that causes us to really conflict or to over connect,
right,
in an adverse way with people. So
really mostly communication and expectation.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And then the other piece of that is really those boundaries that we set with ourselves. And in the book, hopefully you'll be able to purchase the book. You can find it on Amazon. I know Amazon's a little slow on everything right now. We don't have it on Audible yet, but you can download it, buy it off of Amazon by typing in Dean and Nixon, and it'll bring up the key, and it will bring up the 4 steps to confidence.
Another way you can get it is to come on in. We do a really awesome coaching series with it.
Yes.
Both Dean and myself do.
And Jamie
as well, absolutely.
Yeah, out in the Michigan area.
That when you buy that coaching package, you get the book.
Yes. So in that, we talk a lot about really setting boundaries with ourselves, and the need to set the boundaries with ourselves, because how many times do we make ourselves the problem? How many times do we make ourselves the perpetrator or the victim? How many times do we sit around and pick on ourselves and grind on ourselves, rather than stepping back and going, okay, what is the problem? What is the solution? And setting the boundaries to help eliminate a lot of those character flaws and things within us that are impacting us. And there's other videos that we've done on this topic that you can go back and get even more insight as we're winding down out of time, as always.
Out of time. It's great.
It's important for us to go back and look at those. So again, boundaries.
Yes. Everybody loves boundaries.
Well,
maybe I'm going to make a song about it this week, you guys, and I will present it to you next week.
So as always, thank you for tuning in and liking and sharing our videos. Please, as always, take these and turn them into table topics with your family.
Oh yeah, because think, if you would have learned the difference between a wall and a boundary and how to communicate and not make people the problem when you were 12?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, you'd probably have more friends.
You'd probably be a lot better at it than you are right now.
Well, so thank you for tuning in. We're not sure if our video's coming in on our other 2 feeds.
Yeah, I'll get them
Hopefully
posted.
If not, we'll share them. But otherwise, thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Monday Night Live. Oh, tune in for the podcast.
Yes.
We will be posting them on as many of our media platforms as we can. So there will be further discussions, and you can go to our Spreaker app, or you can go to Spotify and some of these others, and you can find, just type in the Dean and Kate podcast.
Yep.
Right? Is that it?
That's it.
And you can pull up all of our podcasts. So thank you, and we will see you all next
Monday Night Live.
All right.
Have a great week.
I'll go up, and then I don't even know